So what's everybody seeing? Are they seeing a bunch of Microsoft Teams, or are they seeing GitHub?
GitHub.
Okay, so Zoom just has weird UI and makes me think I'm sharing a different screen than I really am. Okay, so right now, so kind of the motivation for this action is, so you're building containers and you're pulling in a few kind of dependencies and whatnot, and you want to verify that they have kind of signatures on them that you trust. And so I've just kind of wrapped this up into a GitHub action. So kind of the prerequisites here are you need to kind of have a signing, kind of ignore the repository names. These are all temporary. We'll get a real repository here, hopefully in a week or two. So kind of the prerequisites is you need a signing certificate that you drop into the workspace of your action somehow. So either you can either just like check it into your repository, and then you can use the checkout action to pull it into your action, or you can create a secret and just kind of dump that in there. If you really know GitHub Actions, I'm sure there's probably a lot of other ways you can kind of create files and stuff. So you can specify multiple signing keys, and it'll configure Ratify when it runs it to use all of those signing keys. And if your artifact is signed by any of them, it should pass at that point. Then you also specify a subject, which is just the image name, basically. So myregistry.com Nginx version 5.2 or something like that. So the way this works is, I have another repository that's actually using it here. So you can kind of see here, it has a signing certificates checked in, and then I also created a secret for it. So this is just kind of a standard action, basically. So let's actually just go. So for the demo, I just kind of specified to run it on manually. And then you specify where to pull the action from. And then I have one registry that has NetMonitor version 1, which is signed properly. And I have a second action here. We're going to upgrade NetMonitor to version 2 today, but we need to make sure that it's signed properly. So we'll run this action and we'll figure that out. So since this is a manual triggered one, we just kind of click run workflow, and then it'll slowly chug along. We can look at one I did this morning. So this is kind of what the output will look like. This is kind of the interesting ratify step here. So it's able to kind of pull it in the NetMonitor v1 image. So this is kind of where we're saying that we want to check NetMonitor v1. And then down here, it chugs through and it finds a signature and it says that it's true. And so this guy is still running. So we'll take a look at, and we have our action that will test against NetMonitor v2 and make sure that that's properly signed as well before we incorporate that into our product. So while that's running, we can kind of look at that. So here you can see we have NetMonitor v2, and it says it's failed because I haven't signed it. So Yeah, so are there any questions around that? Or Tasia, I see your hand.
It's not hand raised. I thought it was clapping.
Oh, it might have been clapping.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So,
Okay,
so
maybe.
I have a question. If you can hear me.
Yep.
So, Teja, I may be confused about this, but I thought Ratify will call the verifier. In this case, it's Notary V2, and let the Notary V2 bring their trust store with them. But here I saw Ratify having the signing certificate with it and it verifying the signature.
So, Samir, I think is the question around how do we configure the trust store or trust certificates in this workflow?
Well, actually, I was under the impression that Ratify will not have its own trust
Correct.
store. It will rely on the verifier, which in this case will be Notation,
Yes.
and let Notation bring its own trust store. And I don't know how
Yes.
how that will work. But in
I
this
think
example,
it's still the case, Samir. I think the Ratify will host these plugins, right? One of the plugins is the Notary Verifier.
Yep.
So when we configure these plugins with the Ratify, we specify the configuration as to where the plugin is located and some configuration that is specific to the plugin. Now, if we take the Notation plugin, there is this configuration of trust store or trusted certificate, location, and so on things. That should be configured when you run Ratify.
got it.
So maybe Nathan, can you show what config you use to run the
Right. So yeah, so this is kind of the skeleton config. I more or less add in some stuff down here at verification certs, depending on how you configure the action. So it adds verification certs as an array of file names, basically. So
now where are you passing these cert locations in your workflow?
So in your action YAML, it's just one of the, you have two arguments you pass in. And so one is, I guess I should probably rename it signing certs, but you just can pass in a comma delimited list of certificates that you've brought into your workspace, and it'll add it to your Ratify config.
So is the GitHub action updating that config dynamically? It's replacing this value in that config when it runs the Ratify?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Samir, is that clear or?
Yeah, I think it is clear. I can see how we need it here for right now for us to see Ratify in action. But I'm just wondering aloud here that in future, when Notation will offer its own trust store config, will we expect customers to modify the Notation trust store config directly, or will it be done as part of Ratify verify action?
Okay, I think then when you say Notation trust store, what does that mean? What is the format of that one? Is that a bunch of configuration that Notation takes as to where the certs are there or where the location of the certs?
Correct. That is what I'm referring to.
Yeah, so then that's what this configuration is also pointing out, right? So this GitHub action is now taking that Notation config, and internally it is replacing the Notation configuration with that certs.
Okay.
So this is the entry point, actually. This is the plugin for us, Notary V2 plugin.
Yep.
And the plugin actually, and the configuration verification certs is specific to that plugin, correct? Verification certs.
Correct.
Right? So you are supposed to configure that when you call the plugin. Now that's where the GitHub action is dynamically injecting whatever you sent to that signing certs into this parameter before it invokes that plugin.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm with you. Not being familiar with open source and then how the plugins work. So I guess we're talking about the same thing, that making sure the right certificate is there to do the verification. What I was thinking is then that when the Notary V2 plugin is configured, that's where the certificate is passed. And you are saying that's the configuration part of the Notary V2 plugin.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
That's where the dynamically it's updated when the action is run.
got it. Dynamically, it is
It's
dynamically,
passed through.
yeah, it's passed, but it should be dynamically updated at installation time. At every signature verification time, we don't have to pass the cert again, right?
Right. I mean, this
But,
so this is like an onion, right? We have notation is a plugin that's running underneath Ratify that is being configured by GitHub Actions. So there's like a couple layers that you go through. If you take out the GitHub Actions for a moment and you just have the Ratify configuration, as soon as the Ratify process is up and it's configured, you don't have to continue to reference certificates. You've already configured the notation plugin, and every time you were to ask Ratify to do a verification that's notary based, it will use that list of certificates.
Okay.
So the GitHub action is just another layer on top of our config that allows you to change that around using GitHub, GitHub action syntax.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the GitHub action invokes Ratify, Ratify invokes verifier, and that's how the configuration is propagated all the way to the notary.
Got it. I think we're aligned now. That's good.
So you might need to think like that means now we have two levels of the config. Either you want to keep them in sync. Here it's called verification cert. In the GitHub action, it's called some other config. So this mapping is something maybe we should sort it out. Do you want to unify the same? So people don't need to remember two names. Oh, in GitHub action is signing certs. Here it is verification.
Yeah.
Or do you think they don't need to care? Or if they have to
No,
deal with something, right?
No, I think verification certs is probably a better name to use in the GitHub action. Signing certs is you're kind of leaking implementation details on what's actually happening there. You're verifying, you're not. Yeah, I think verification certs is a better.
Maybe
name.
in line with whatever this config, the name could be the
Yeah.
same so that
Mhm.
people can relate it. Yeah. Oh, this
Yeah.
is the same config that gets propagated.
Yep, that's great feedback. Yeah,
So I don't know where we are with the Notary V2. I think somewhere like, are we thinking of the remote locations for the certs, the trust store?
Both.
Anything like from Key Vault or something?
Yeah.
So how do we, or is it not a supported scenario in GitHub action?
So if there's an action that will pull something in from a key vault or that sort of a service and dump it in your file system, it should work.
I see.
It also depends. It's probably easier to do it that way. I know that Notation has plugins that allow it, like Notation itself, to go out and get that stuff from like cloud providers. But it'd probably be easier to not do that yet, since we don't support that directly through Ratify. So,
Nathan, one question: how did it access the ACR?
I still have just public, or it's anonymous.
What's the plan?
ACR.
What's the plan for private ACR?
I think it's more or less we need to get kind of all the authorization stuff working, and then you can use GitHub secrets to put in credentials if you want to. Would probably be the most direct way.
I see. Eric, I think is the current way to use Docker config, right? That's the only supported auth model.
yes, that and Akash's PR to add workload identity, but
but that's not applicable over here.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah,
because that is AKS, Kubernetes related. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, user Docker config user pass.
That's also Docker config. I don't know. Usually, when they access ACRs in GitHub workflows, do they use the?
There is also a Docker login action as well that maybe that would work here.
So it's the password out.
So yeah, so I was just going to kind of say our next steps here are where we'll set up a new new repository under Deus Labs, and then I'll open up a PR with something that looks kind of like what my little semi-private repository, and we can hopefully get kind of this action published and stuff. So.
Got it. And also good to think about private ACR, I think, Nathan.
Yeah.
Just at least username and password. How do we support that flow?
Sure, sure.
Great, great. Nathan.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll turn it back to Susan.
Oh, hey, Nathan. Thanks for the demo.
One question, Nathan.
Yep.
The GitHub workflow is calling Ratify. How did it know that it has to install these plugins? Like tomorrow, I wanted to include some test verifiers. How is that? Today, you're using the default configuration of Ratify, which comes with 2 verifiers, Notary and SPOM. What's the path for including these verifiers, custom verifiers?
We can add additional stuff, additional arguments to the action itself. The action is more or less just so the Ratify repo has a Docker container that it packages up and builds, and so that's kind of the basis for the action. That's where it pulls it from and packages all that up. But we can continue to add stuff. More arguments and stuff to the action.yaml, or what I forget what it's called, but we can support more arguments there. So
I see. No, because I'm just thinking aloud. Instead of using this one-on-one separate parameter for every parameter in the Ratify, do we benefit if we take the config of Ratify in the GitHub action itself?
Well, some of that is kind of, I think we might just run into problems with just kind of the syntax. You have to have kind of a YAML file.
I see.
I guess you could check in your Ratify configuration and then specify a file name as well, and do kind of the same trick I'm doing with the certificates. That would probably be the way to work around that.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Nathan.
Just to confirm my understanding, Nathan, do you mean that the configuration can be passed into the input as an input if there's any configuration?
We could do that. It's not implemented.
Yeah, if we need to in the future, that's
yeah. I think that would be that would be my plan right now, but we'll see what we need. So
sounds good. Yep, thanks for the demo. Eric, would you like to take over and start the discussion on authentication model?
I can. Let me check. Akash, are you here? I see you down there.